Hi, everybody. It's Jeannie Walters with Experience Investigators, and we are back for a 2021 Ask Me Anything webinar. The topic we're going to be talking about today is is it is or are? The topic is 5 steps to take before creating a voice of the customer program. And this is something that I think will have a lot of leverage for those of you who are planning for 2021, making some changes, working on strategy, that type of thing. And as you join us, as always, we love to hear from you. So feel free to drop in where you're joining us from. At the end, we will have questions. And as always, we've got David Hornreich with us, our Director of Marketing. Hi, David.
Hello, hello. Great to be back live again.
I know this is exciting. It's our first one of the year.
It is.
Well, good. Well, you'll be moderating those questions at the end and making sure that everybody gets a chance. Hopefully, we'll watch the time. But if we don't get to you during those live sessions, we do make an effort to follow up with those of you who do ask those questions. So don't be shy today, right?
Absolutely. Send in your questions and send in your comments too. If anything strikes a light bulb in your mind and you feel compelled to share your thoughts, the community and the chat is part of what makes this great. So we're happy to have you here. And we've got a lot of people already commenting. We've got Alejandro here again. Good to see you. Jenna, great to see you from Toronto. Tyler, I'm going to guess in Denver, but I know that you do travel around, so who knows?
Who knows?
Elena says, loved your podcast, Jeannie. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, Jeannie, you're everywhere.
Well, that's the magic of the internet, right?
It
We can
is.
all be everywhere.
It's true.
So, well, we are thrilled to see you joining us again. As always, we have some regulars, we have some new faces. It's great to see you all. And let's go ahead and get started. So, first of all, for those of you who don't know me, I am Jeannie Walters. I have been doing this type of customer experience work for about 20 years now, more than 20 years. And really, what we try to do here is help you create your CX success. And that's where, we do a lot around content. We have some great resources for you. So if you are looking for some help doing a kickoff campaign or a webinar or things like that, please feel free to reach out on all of these different channels. We love to hear from you. We love to support your customer experience success. And this year, starting back in October on CX Day, which is always a Tuesday in October, we launched the Year of CX. And if you haven't signed up for this, I really encourage you to do this. We are releasing new tools every few weeks that are free. They're downloads. They are robust in many cases to help you with things like defining your customer experience success statement, helping you with journey mapping, helping you with storyboarding, all of these different techniques that we use in customer experience. We want you to have the access to that. So sign up there at yearofcx.com and you can get all of those resources delivered straight to you. So let's talk about one of the staples of most customer experience programs, and that is a voice of the customer program. And in fact, a lot of times when I talk about voice of the customer, people say to me things like, oh, yeah, we do CX, we have voice of the customer, as if they are one and the same. And I would argue that voice of the customer is an absolute important factor in a greater customer experience strategy, but it is another piece of the puzzle. You guys have probably heard me say things like there's no magic metric, there's no one tool. I really think of customer experience as kind of a mosaic. We have to make sure that we're getting that objective measurement. We have to make sure that we're tracking those metrics. And we also have to make sure that we're getting all of that wonderful, unstructured feedback, things that are very nuanced about human nature, and putting that all together and then applying that to the business outcomes that we want. And so sometimes when we conflate the two, when we say voice of the customer is customer experience, we're missing some of those other parts. Voice of the customer programs, which are often referred to as VOC, so you'll hear me say that today, they are often part of a toolkit, but sometimes they are seen as, okay, if we can just track what our customers are listening to, then we'll be all set. And so they get started a lot with the tactics instead of the strategy. And I've seen this over and over where leaders will say, well, we found this great tool and we're going to start listening to our customers all over the place. But they haven't necessarily thought about what they'll do with that feedback. They haven't necessarily thought about, are these the right places to ask for feedback? Sometimes they release that tool kind of into the wild of an organization, and one department uses it for one thing and another department uses it for another. And the customer is the one who's getting fatigued by all these feedback requests. So the feedback starts deteriorating as well. So when I am approached about voice of the customer programs, one of the things I do is kind of say, let's put the brakes on a little bit. Let's talk about your strategy. Let's talk about what is most important to your organization to make sure that we are setting you up for success. So this is often the backbone of a customer experience strategy, but it still has to have a strategy of its own. Because if we don't take this step, if we don't really set you up for success, then what happens is sorry, I'm bouncing all over the place. What happens is that people get very excited about the numbers, the objective reporting and things like that. And then it kind of fizzles and they say, well, this didn't really do anything because there's lots of reporting on it, but it doesn't really go anywhere. So today we're going to talk about 5 steps for you to take to set up your voice of the customer program for success. The first one, you've heard me say this before, define your goals. That is so important for this. The next one, identify your customers. This may seem obvious, but we'll talk about why this is such an important step. And number 3, we want to set up listening posts with a listening map because that's more strategic. That's more about looking beyond, okay, we can ask customers for feedback at this point, but should we? That's a greater question to apply. And then you want to collaborate with your CX champions. You want to make sure that as you go in and as you build your voice of the customer program, that you are leveraging those cross-functional relationships. You are involving those leaders in the beginning because then they'll have more stake in the activities and outcomes that these programs provide. So make sure you're inviting them in as you're designing these programs. And then finally, we want to assure the inquiries are aligned with outcomes. And I'll talk about this too. But essentially, we want to make sure that the questions we're asking are actually going to lead to the outcomes that we're really seeking. So before we jump into these, I do want to mention that some of you probably already have a voice of the customer program and you're thinking, well, gosh, did we skip this and did we miss our opportunity? Absolutely not. If you already have a voice of the customer program, it does not hurt to ask these questions again. When you are looking at the results that you're getting, take a step back and ask, well, did we really define that goal? What do we need to learn here? And using these questions can guide you to kind of make sure that you're getting the most out of the program that you already have set up. So if you already have a VOC program that's functioning, hopefully this still will apply to you because you can go back and kind of refresh and look at if you're really set up for the success that you want. So first thing we want to say is define your goals, of course. Now, again, this seems so obvious, but sometimes people say to me, well, we just want to listen to our customers. We want to hear what they have to say. And that's great, but that's a really hard goal to manage if you're asking every customer every time they interact with your organization, or if you're only asking customers, let's say once a year in certain circumstances or at certain milestones, but that's not tied to a greater strategy. So this is where you can really rely on something we've talked about in the past here, which is a customer experience success statement. If you know what your goals are for your overall customer experience strategy, then you can define your goals for the voice of the customer program to support that greater strategy. And of course, if you haven't heard of that CX success statement before, go ahead and either sign up for Year of CX, you'll get access there, or we can put up a link for you to where to download that information. So there we go. So we have a whole workbook to help you through that. So what result do you want to get out of the knowledge that you will get from a voice of the customer program? Because if you are looking at things like, okay, we want to listen to our customers and find out what they need, what will that do? Where will that go in your organization? Is that about product development? Is it about roadmaps? Really try to define what you'll do with that information in order to listen for the right things from the right people at the right time. So define your goals. Next, you do want to identify your customers. And this is a little bit of a two-sided coin because it can be very helpful when you're actually using a voice of the customer program. It will help you develop better personas. It will help you get to know your customers more. Absolutely. But as you're starting this, as you're setting up your VOC strategy, you want to figure out what makes the most sense for who to ask for feedback. So, for example, if one of your goals is retention and renewal, then you don't want to ask customers who just joined, right, within their first 90 days. That probably won't give you enough information about those customers that maybe you're losing at the 1 or 2 year mark. You want to look at who are these customers, where are they on their journey, and how can we approach the right customers to get the right information that we need to, again, support those goals that we just defined. So the other part here is that sometimes customers aren't always just customers, right? We need to make sure that the entire journey is supported. So I like to ask questions about, should we include supply chain partners here? Should we include employees here? Should we include distributors? Because if that's part of the customer journey that we are looking to define and looking to reform at all or improve, then we want to make sure that we're connecting all of those dots. So including those types of partners and vendors and folks like that who have an influence on your customers, absolutely include them in a voice of the customer program too, because their feedback can be incredibly valuable. Sometimes they are also more willing to give you feedback than those end customers. So be sure that you're really identifying who should we include here and why. And then that will help you move forward to really get the type of information that you're looking for. And then you also want to set up your listening post with a listening map. This is where, and I know this word makes everybody cringe, but this is where governance is super important. Because if you just release a tool to the masses and say, okay, everybody, we've got this great tool for voice of the customer. We're going to start, proposing surveys. We're going to start putting some tabs on our digital channels and they can tell us what they want. If you don't do that with a greater strategy and a centralized place to govern that, then what tends to happen is customers get asked for the same information over and over. The data that comes back isn't centralized in a place where we can use it, where we can leverage those insights, and it just becomes kind of a mess. And sometimes you'll see this in the feedback that you get from customers. They'll say things like, hey, you guys have asked me this before, or, you know what, I just got a survey 2 weeks ago and nothing happened, and now I'm getting another survey. That doesn't make any sense. And so if we don't come across as a unified brand to our customers, that is a negative impact on the customer experience. So we really need to think about the voice of the customer program as part of the customer journey as well. And that's why this is so important. So a listening map, you can do this a couple different ways. You can actually set it up as you're defining and identifying what tools you have and how you can actually approach customers. You can also do this as a kind of a layer on top of your journey map. If you have an existing journey map, and you know that there are points, if you're looking at your journey map and you've got that emotional wave going on and you see that there's a valley somewhere, that's probably somewhere you want to really get customer feedback. That's a great place to put a listening post and figure out, what are we going to do with this feedback to improve that emotional wave and bring up that valley. So that's one way to look at this. The other way is sometimes you have limitations. Sometimes your tools that you have available, or just because of the way your organization is set up, you might not be able to reach them in certain channels. You might not be set up, let's say, to have support through text and then send them something for feedback. That might not be part of how you're set up. So knowing those limitations, that allows you to figure out some workarounds too. So maybe those people that reach out via text are also very likely to reach out via social media messaging. If you know that about them, then you can start putting listening posts where it makes the most sense and even include some of that, especially if you have that centralized data and you know that they reached out via text, you can follow up and ask them in a different channel. So listening post kind of strategy and figuring out where and how to do this, it can save a lot of headache later if you just dive in and kind of put the tool everywhere. And then fourth, you want to collaborate with those CX champions. You want to make this cross-functional, just like almost everything we do in customer experience. We want to get buy-in from those leaders who will have the accountability and the authority to get things done. And so that means if you know that you're reaching out on digital and you're trying to figure out some issues with digital and the feedback around that, you want to make sure you're including those digital leaders, the people who are able to design those improvements, to implement those improvements, to really have that accountability over it. Because the worst thing to happen is just saying, hey, we just added a listening post. And I saw this happen where somebody who had designed the entire mobile experience looked at their phone and said, what is this thing? And it was a listening post that somebody had just kind of implemented without including them. And so it's very important to reach out, to make those relationships, to build those bridges and include people, because guess what? Once you get that feedback, you're going to have to ask them to take action around it. And so getting them involved early can help set you up for success a lot more. And then, we want to make sure that our inquiries are aligned with our outcomes. And this sounds kind of vague, but really, I've seen a lot of people say, well, we're going to track NPS. And I say, okay, great. Why? Why are you tracking that? Well, we want to find out how satisfied they are with this particular interaction. Okay, well, that might be the right metrics, but it might not. We want to make sure that we are aligning what we're asking with the outcomes that we're looking for. Each metric has strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes it's best to use, again, that mosaic of different pieces of information to really understand what's going on. And that could mean that, you have an annual NPS survey to really determine loyalty, to figure out, are these people going to continue with you? You might have a customer satisfaction survey at key points along the journey. You might have a customer effort score situation for things like self-service. If somebody's going to figure out something on their own, we want to make sure that that effort is very low. So really identifying which metrics align with which goals and how will we leverage those is a key part of this. The other part of this is making sure that we can do something with this information. I think it's all of our pet peeves when we ask questions, when we ask for feedback, we are asking customers to put in that effort and then nothing happens with it. It's just not worth it. It's not worth asking for feedback that you're not going to use. So make sure that you are aligning all of these different situations with those outcomes that you're seeking, because otherwise it can feel a lot like we're spinning our wheels, and introducing these tools, introducing this point of effort for the customer, asking them for that feedback, and then not only not closing the loop with them, but just not doing anything with it. That's not a great way to build a relationship. So the other thing I'll say here is that we cannot forget about this wonderful unstructured feedback that we get from customers. So as you build your voice of the customer program, make sure that you're not just narrowly focusing on these objective metrics. They are absolutely helpful. They help us gauge how we're doing overall. They are critical to any voice of the customer program. But we also want to make sure we're including things like customer interviews, employee interviews. What can your agents in the contact center tell you? What can social media reviews tell you? All of these different things. So you want to make sure that you're not missing that unstructured, more nuanced feedback because you're so focused on these objective numbers. Because what tends to happen with voice of the customer is in the beginning, we get a lot of great ideas for quick wins. We see things, we're able to fix them, we're able to move the needle, and then it can stagnate a bit. And it can stagnate because things are actually going well for your customers, but they will tell you things in that unstructured feedback that will be kind of the alarm bells of the future. So as their expectations change, they might say things in that unstructured feedback like, you know what? I'm really happy with you guys. I love this brand. I love being a customer. But I noticed that the competition is now offering XYZ. When are you guys going to do that? That is something to pay attention to in a voice of the customer program, because that tells you what expectations are changing. They're telling you, yes, your NPS is really high, they love you, but, and that's what you can find in that unstructured side of the house that sometimes can elude you when you're just tracking those metrics. So, again, to recap where we are here, you want to define your goals. You want to identify your customers, and that is an iterative process. That will be something that you can learn from, you can apply, you can create those new personas, and you can also just get to know or identify which customers you really want this information from as well. And then you want to set up listing posts with a listening map. And this is something that you can do a variety of different ways. Don't overcomplicate this one. Don't overcomplicate this one. It does not have to be an atlas. It has to be just a map of here's where we are. The other thing that does is that if you know that one of those listening posts isn't working, or you know you want to add another one and you think that would be too much for the customer, it makes adapting in the future that much easier. You want to collaborate with your CX champions. Make sure that you're involving people early in the process. Get their buy-in. Make sure that they're part of this so that you're not springing it on them, or you're not going to them later and saying, I need your help on this, and they've never heard about this before. And then assure your inquiries are aligned with your outcomes. Make sure that you're asking the right questions in the right way for the right metrics to move towards your goals. So this is a very circular process. We want to get the information, we want to, leverage those insights, we want to act on that information, and then we want to do it all over again. And so the question that I like to ask is, are you ready to really start listening? It seems so simple, but your customers are ready. They are ready to tell you things. But at the same time, you need to be ready to do something with that information in a way that respects and honors them. We can't just keep asking for feedback because the tools are amazing and we have all these resources now. We have to really think strategically, not only about our organization and what we'll get out of it, but also how does this fit in the customer journey? How can we honor that? How can we make sure that asking for feedback is actually improving the experience and not taking away from it? So once you've set up the voice of the customer program, with these 5 steps, that's when you're really ready to get into the nitty-gritty, to figure out where do we do these feedback mechanisms, and how do we include our customers, and what will this look like in a year, and all of those things. But I really encourage you to take this first step and set that foundation for success, because that's what can really drive you forward. And so if you haven't already, I'm going to give a shout out again to our Year of CX, because that's what that's all about. It's giving you the tools to set up foundational success, because customer experience programs in general often skip this step. And then a year later, everybody says, so were we successful? Did our customer experience get better? We have to get better at defining success. And that's what this is all about. So at this point, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear your questions and see if we can figure out this voice of the customer stuff together.
All right. Thanks, Jeannie. And we've got just a couple comments that have come in. Roland says, great content, Jeannie. Shavaz says, great info. And I do want to highlight that Tyler said, my Fridays will finally feel complete again at the top of this.
We're happy you're here, Tyler.
Ours too, Tyler. Ours too. I'm going to jump in with a question that came through email first, but as you have questions or thoughts, keep those coming in the chat and the comments. So this first question asks, how do we create an environment where low feedback scores are seen as an opportunity and not a penalty? When employees are incentivized to get higher scores, sometimes that means they act in a way that might lead to higher reported scores, but muddies the picture of what's actually going on. So how do we counteract that?
Yeah, this is kind of harkens back to questions we've had about gaming the system, right? When you are a customer yourself, you've probably experienced this where you're walking out of some place, or you just had a delivery or something, and they write to you and say, hey, if we can't get 5 stars from you, we need to know why. And sometimes employees will game the system as well. That's why it's so important to have this, mosaic, to make sure that we're not just relying on one driver. We're not just looking at, okay, well, the post-delivery survey is all 5 stars. We must be doing a great job. We wanna make sure that we're giving customers opportunities to share what's really going on. Now, that's why the centralized approach to this is also so important, because sometimes it is perfectly appropriate to have that one question, survey that says, "Hey, how'd we do 1 through 5?" That's sometimes very, very appropriate, but we wanna make sure that that's layered on top of the overall experience that a customer has. So I would say it is an opportunity to move the needle to make sure that you are able to improve those things, but this requires a little bit of reflection. We have to ask ourselves, did anything really change? Did we actually improve things for the customer? What's going on here? And that's where really leveraging insights comes in. It's not enough to collect the feedback, it's not enough to report the feedback. We need to really spend some time analyzing and evaluating what's really going on, how can we improve it, make those changes, and then track again. And that's why this is such a cyclical process. We want to gather those insights, act on those insights, and then ask again. We want to make sure that those improvements that we made actually improve things for the customer. But it can be a little tricky, and that's why, especially around accountability, and especially if we incentivize based on just scores, that can get a little tricky too. I'm a big believer that it's important to include customer experience as a motivator, as a goal, all of those things. But I also think we have to marry that with not just the score, but the overall picture.
That's great. And I want to highlight something that was actually highlighted by Chavaz, and I hope I'm not completely butchering your name, by the way. I have a middling track record with that. But he said, I loved that comment. Are you ready for the feedback that you may receive? Are you ready to hear it? Are you ready to act on it? Are you ready to actually use it? Do you want to comment on
Yeah,
that
I
at
just
all?
want to. I appreciate that you highlighted that, because that's the hardest question. It really is. It's about being really honest about leadership and saying, "Are we really ready to hear this?" Because one thing I hear over and over and over when I first start working with somebody, almost to a one, they all say, "Well, our customers love us." And they really believe that because that's who they're hearing from, that's who they have relationships from and or with. And when I am talking about programs like these, and I try to set the stage a little bit and say, you know what, we're going to hear from customers who have never been asked for feedback before. We're going to hear from customers who have been carrying a grudge and telling all of their friends, but they've never told you because nobody's asked. We're going to hear from customers who feel neglected and ignored because they aren't the ones who you have that wonderful relationship with. They're not singing your praises. So they're actually just kind of on their own. So we need to really prepare leadership to hear from people in a way that they might not be prepared for. And I feel for leaders here. I mean, we've all been on the receiving end of this, right? Where you say, "Oh, we're going to get such good feedback." And then you get the one comment, and that's the one you carry around all day. We joke about this in the professional speaking world because you can get 100 evaluations that say, "Yes, that was great." And then you get the one who said, I didn't really like your hair, or I didn't really like your your story about XYZ. And that's the one we remember. It's human nature. And so when we are looking at feedback, it's really easy to want to dismiss those things. And leaders who have invested in this organization, who maybe have designed the very processes that customers are complaining about, that's hard. And I think that it's worth recognizing that that's difficult, but we have to be ready. We have to really prepare ourselves emotionally, even to hear that feedback in a way that is open and humble and ready for change if we need to make it.
Jeannie, I know in the past in these sessions and then also just in the resource center and everywhere else, you've talked about a particular type of journey mapping, which is building an ideal state journey map. I want to highlight a couple of comments that I think tie in voice of the customer to that ideal state journey map really, really well. First of all, one says, One could argue that using this feedback to craft a customer experience ahead of time will be the best way to achieve success in delivering a better customer experience. And then Alejandro separately says, one way could be that at the end of the VOP or the VOC setup, you create an ideal journey map. And based on that, you can fix and implement what's needed to achieve that ideal map.
This makes me so happy. Yeah, those are, first of all, those are wonderful activities to highlight, and you're absolutely right. Everything we do in customer experience kind of feeds into another thing. And that's what is so both exciting and sometimes maddening about it, because you're never quite done, right? Like, it's not like you can say, hey, look, we did it. Everybody's happy, and we're just going to keep doing this. Everything feeds into everything else. And so, whenever you have a journey map of any kind, it's great to have this data attached to it. If you are using that feedback and the voice of the customer, you can design that ideal state journey. You can use this in service blueprinting. You can use this in communication throughout your organization. There are so many ways to lean on a voice of the customer program to really inform and help you execute on all these other pieces to make that customer experience strategy really sing and to achieve that success that you've outlined in the success statement. So wonderful, wonderful suggestions. Thank you for sharing those.
So we talked about asking for and collecting that sort of more free-form, qualitative written feedback. So Roland asks, how do we take this free-form written feedback and feed this into a mathematical model? Can we quantify it? Can we get some sort of return from this?
Yeah, we have some amazing technology available now which can help with this too. There are so many different tools out there, but rudimentary methods still work. So one of the things that you can do is take, the feedback and look for themes. Look for ideas like, you know what, it sounds like everybody's struggling with the payment process on our mobile app. That could be a theme then. And then as you're listening to customers, either in interviews or just through that unstructured feedback, you can start quantifying how many customers are really complaining about this thing. They might be using different words, they might be saying different things, but that's one thing. So that's kind of the very basic way to do that. But then you can also use things like, and this is another simple one, but you can use word clouds. So put all of that unstructured feedback into a way that suddenly words pop out. You can see those emotions like frustrated or disappointed, and you can start drilling down from there on what does that really mean. But there are some easy ways to do it that way. The other way is there are some amazing tools out there that actually take that input and they look for the sentiment. So text analytics or sentiment analysis, it's called, different things based on kind of the different layers of robustness that you have in your programs. But essentially what that does is they take all of that unstructured feedback and artificial intelligence and all those wonderful things that are smarter than me will come back and say, you know what, 80% of customers are expressing feedback that they are frustrated and they have mentioned your chatbot as part of that. And so suddenly you have real data based on what people are telling you. I mean, it's all real data to be fair, but you have objective data then that you can quantify and report out. So there are some really amazing things out there. Some tools now will also use tone of voice analysis. So people who call into your contact center, the machines can figure out what is the emotion that they're really feeling and how can we quantify that. So there are so many things available now. If you don't have those types of robust programs, then you can start with some of those simpler ways. It's absolutely more manual work. It takes more time. It takes somebody really paying attention, but there are ways to do that. And then you can include that in your reporting, and then you can start gauging how you're doing based on that too. So if you found that 80% of people said they were frustrated with your mobile app payment process, and you start tracking that through unstructured feedback, maybe in 6 months after you've made that improvement, you can report back and say, hey, 40% now are complaining instead of 80%. So there are definitely ways to do that moving forward.
That I hadn't heard of the technology that actually can take like voice inflection
Yep.
and turn that into sentiment. That's a little bit terrifying, but
It gets
very
even more
cool also.
terrifying because now they have facial recognition that does that too. And
Yeah.
so in the future, you could be at an airline ticket counter and that agent will get things on their screen saying, this person looks displeased or whatever. And they're tracking that. So then, by the time you get to your gate at the airport, that whole team is prepared and knows that they need to be extra nice to you.
Well, I welcome our new robot overlords.
Right. I think we all have to at this point.
Keep your questions coming if you have them. I want to highlight a comment that Juan made, going back to the concept of kind of having employees game the system. He said, we need to train frontline staff to ask for honest feedback. I've been asked to leave a 5-star review in exchange for an immediate perk.
Yes,
I think we've all gotten that. And yeah, I agree. It does feel really awkward, doesn't it?
it does. It's very, when it first launched, right? Like way back in the day when people were getting those individual transactional responses to things, it was authentic. And then people started figuring out that they could game the system. And customers know the pain of having somebody hold the card in front of you, right? Like at the car dealership, this happens. They hold the card in front of you and say, "Well, if you can't give me five stars or whatever, uh, can you let me know now before I give you this card?" And it's like you just want to leave at that point. You just want to get on with your day. And so I think we have to really take a look at how we're asking for feedback and how we're reporting that feedback back. Because if it's all punitive, if the reason people do that, the reason employees do that is because they don't want to be punished, right? They want to make sure that they are seen for the efforts that they're put in. And that's why I'm really a big fan of immediate connection of those things with coaching, with going up to somebody in the contact center and saying, I heard you had a really tough call a couple calls ago. Can we talk about that? Because that's more about helping everybody get better instead of this, like, we heard that you got all threes last month. Do something about that or else. With no tools, no resources, no support. We have to shift how we think about this and give the people who are on the front line more support, a little more generosity of spirit here and more empathy with what they're doing because especially in today's world, anxiety is high across the board. And one of the things I've been mentioning, which I think is super important, is that every single employee interaction with a customer, we don't know where that customer is coming from right now. They could have been waiting on hold with the unemployment agency for hours, literally. They could have been trying to schedule a doctor's appointment for their parent and running into all sorts of issues. They could have been dealing with a second grader in virtual school all day while they're trying to do their full-time work. So we have all these extra stressors in the world right now, and we have to really remember that when we are dealing directly with customers because they're bringing all of that to us, and we have to be emotionally sensitive to that. And so that's why in the last, year, a lot of people have said, "Wow, our numbers are going down and we don't know why." And the numbers that they're talking about are the feedback, like NPS and things like that. But if you look at what's actually happening, call times are way up in contact centers. That's because people have bigger problems to solve and they're really looking for that support. The other thing that's happened are wait times have gone way up, especially because of spikes in certain schedules. Like in the US here, when the first stimulus check went out, banks suddenly had to realize that they were going to be, overwhelmed with customers looking for support because they were trying to figure out where is this check going to show up? Why isn't it in my account? All of these things. So we have to really look ahead in bigger ways right now. And we have to also adjust some of our expectations about these numbers. But when we look at just that one metric, like the 5 stars from the employee feedback card, we have to put that in the greater context of the world that we live in, what our customers are going through, and then use it for good. Go back to that employee, talk to them about it, make sure that they're supported. That's where you see real change happen. Otherwise, it just becomes a game. It just becomes something that people kind of shrug at and say, well, yeah, we're going to get 3 stars next month too, because that's just who our customers are. And they start making excuses and rationalizations. So, really make sure that we're looking at the bigger picture in context of some of these numbers as well. So, that was a very long explanation, but I've been thinking about this stuff a lot.
I can tell. It's good to get it off your chest. I want to get to one more question that came in from email this week. Does the cohort that we're seeking feedback from determine how we should be asking for that feedback? Are there general best practices if we're asking for feedback from customers versus employees versus suppliers, etc.?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think a lot of that has to do with the journey. So, really understanding who those customers are, what they prefer to do. There are certain segments that are going to give you feedback most likely through certain channels. So, if people have reached out to you through social media messaging, then that's a great way to reach out to them. We have to remember to honor the channel that the customer comes to us from. So that's one kind of area of that. When it comes to suppliers and partners and employees, the same rules kind of apply. One of the things I've seen is that sometimes suppliers are nervous about providing honest feedback because they're worried it will threaten their relationship. So if you ask a supplier just out of the blue, how are we doing? And it looks like it's going to a certain person that they might already have a relationship with, you probably won't get the most honest feedback. So really look for ways to educate your suppliers that we're going to be reaching out to you. We want to hear what you have to say. Allow for some anonymous ways for them to do that. I know it's much richer and it's much better if we know who's giving us the feedback. So you have to kind of walk that line. But I think, that's one thing. The other thing with employee feedback, if I've seen this over and over where there's an employee survey once a year and they are honest the first time. And then they realize that by being honest, they were subjected to 3-hour meetings with the very manager that they had complained about. And it's not good for anybody. And they are, kind of miserable. And they are not able to do their work to the best of their ability because they're spending all this time trying to rectify something. So thinking about the action that you take with this type of employee feedback is really important, and making sure that employees see on a macro level that you are using that feedback. So instead of just going back to Johnny and saying, we know you complained, we're going to try to work this out with you, and closing the loop with Johnny, you want to make sure that you're announcing on a public level, we heard from all of you that this happened and this happened. We also heard that this was affecting the customer experience. This is what we're going to do about it. We would love your feedback again. So, including people throughout the process, that's a big part of that relationship with employees, that relationship with suppliers, and even to an extent, when it comes to B2B, a lot of long-term relationships with customers, we want to make sure we're including them as much as possible as well.
When we were talking about ways to take qualitative feedback and kind of quantify it, I was sitting here on my end just waiting for you to say word clouds. In my mind, I was thinking word clouds, word clouds, word clouds. So for that reason, I just want to highlight a comment from Debbie here, because she agrees with me, and I like that. The word clouds help create feedback categories based on keywords used. So yes, absolutely, word clouds are a great way to do that. We are out of questions, so I think it's about that time.
Yes.
So Jeannie, where can people find you?
Well, thank you all for joining us again. You always bring so much to this conversation, and I just really appreciate your willingness to continue to learn with us. And this year is going to be a little different. We will have new content for you every week, like we have. But because of my schedule and a few other reasons, we might not be doing these live sessions every week. So stay tuned. We will let you know what that looks like very soon. You can follow us in all these different ways. We encourage you to sign up for our newsletter where you can get a lot of this information. We send it out every week. And also to remind you of the Year of CX, because that's a really great resource that we are providing, that we're getting some really nice feedback about too. So, of course, who would I be if I didn't ask for feedback after this discussion? So if you have feedback, or just because you want to, be a part of my Voice of the Customer program, please send us feedback at bit.ly/let Jeannie know. And if there are topics you want us to cover in the future, if there are resources you want us to add to that Year of CX, please feel free to include that in your feedback as well. We pay attention to all of those things. Many of the resources that we've released this year have been driven by questions and suggestions from you. So please feel free to let us know what you want to hear about next. So feel free to reach out to us. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for fighting the good fight. Our mission is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And by being here, you are helping us live that mission. So thank you. Have a great week. Enjoy the rest of the month, and we will talk to you soon.